In fact, we're going to dedicate today's class to Rabbi Tzvi Kogan, Rabbi Tzvi Yaakov ben Alexander of blessed memory, who was murdered on Kiddush Hashem for the sanctification of God's name. And truth to be told is that, in a sense, that's really what our whole topic is about. Second, why do they always come and do the grass on Tuesdays at 12? It's unbelievable. Their timing.
Yeah, we don't hear it.
You don't hear it? Okay, good. All right.
No.
It's like blaring behind me, but okay, it's good. It's interesting that that's really actually the discussion we've been discussing in the Tanya is really this concept that we as the Jewish people will give up our lives for the sanctification of God's name. We have, unfortunately, many soldiers on the front lines. We had one speak at Shul this week. He's in Lebanon. He was in Lebanon. How some of his friends were killed, and we all have it within us the willingness, the ability to give up our lives for the sanctification of God's name. But yet, living as a Jew is much harder. In other words, dying as a Jew is easy. I shouldn't say it's easy. It's more natural. Let's put it that way. It's natural. Most of us would pass that test. But living as a Jew is harder, and the whole purpose of these last chapters in the Tanya is to bring home to us that we can also take that energy, the fact that we're willing to give up our lives for God, and take that as a way to awaken our inner love and connection to God. So, with that being said, we were towards the end of chapter 24. And the end of chapter 24 has an interesting point. So, we had just ended off bringing, so to speak, proofs. We brought some proofs that just one second. Menachem said last week. Menachem. Okay. So we have in we ended off last week discussing the concept of the fact that there are some commandments that we are told we have to give up our life for. For example, we should not bow down to an idol, even if we lose our life. Does not mean that idolatry is more important or is more severe of a sin than, say, Shabbat. And we brought proof, and we brought examples of the fact that the idea that if someone always commits adultery, their ritual slaughter is kosher, yet if someone always breaks the Shabbat, their ritual slaughter is not kosher. And we said, how could that make sense? If you don't have to give up your life for Shabbat, that means Shabbat is less severe. And adultery, you do have to give up your life for. So how could that work? Rather, he says, you cannot draw any distinctions from, so to speak, the rule of giving up your life or any punishments. The essence of it's really just a decree from God. So that was to prove our point that the fact that one mitzvah has the rule that you have to give up your life for it does not mean that makes it more important. With all this being said, we have to get to the final section here, and it's a topic that I've discussed many times, and that is the punishment. And I told you many times that even though certain sins carry certain punishments, that it also does not mean that the essence of the sin is worse or better. It just means that the effects or the blemish of the sin is more severe or not more severe. The essence of any sin is really disconnecting yourself from God, and there every sin is the same. The after effects could be different. So let's read that inside. That's really his point. I'll get to the question soon. Let me just read this over here. Okay. Section 5 of the Monument of Transgression. An apparent proof that all transgressions are not equal is the variety of punishments prescribed by the Torah. If one transgression is punished more harshly than the other, doesn't that imply that this is a greater violation of God's will? Tanya, and I'll clarify that is not the case by drawing an important distinction between the moment of transgression and its consequences. At the moment of transgression, and this has been his main point, and we harped upon it the last couple of weeks, all sins detach you from God completely. But after the sin has been completed, the spiritual consequence, i.e., the damage that is done to your soul, is different in each case, and that is why the punishment differs, since their purpose is to fix the spiritual damage caused by us. The example I gave last time was a child not listening to their parent, is that it doesn't make a difference what they're not listening to. The essence of not listening is a problem, assuming the parents are not demanding more than is necessary. So, but the essence of not listening is a problem. Now, the after effects of not listening to one versus another could be different, yes, but the essence of obedience and respect and honor is 100% lacking in either scenario, which is why I said sometimes it is appropriate for a parent to come down seriously on a minor infraction, not because of, when I say come down seriously, I don't mean spanking, of course, but it could be important, not because of anything other than the fact that the child has to learn that there has to be a certain respect and decorum in the home. But let's continue. But after the act of transgression has passed, if the act belongs to the category of transgressions, which are neither penalized by kares, cutting off of the soul, nor a heavenly orchestrated death, the person can return to be connected to God, as we shall see. For in that case, his divine soul is not extinguished completely or detached from its source in the living God. Rather, the soul's attachment and rootedness in God becomes compromised in the area of this particular sin. So when you sin, when at the moment of sin, you're completely cut off. But after the sin, you can become reconnected unless you did a sin that includes a complete cutoff. So if you look in the Torah, there are many sins which have the punishment of what's called karet. I mean, your soul will be cut off. And cut off means that the person will die before they're 60. Now, the Alter Rebbe has a whole section towards the end of the Tanya, not in this book, but in the third book of the Tanya, third book of the Tanya, Igeret Teshuvah, the letter of repentance, in which he discusses why nowadays we see people that do these sins and they're not dying. And his basic answer is that we're actually, it's not because we're holier, it's because we're less holy. Those holier people that have such and during the times of the temple, when the connection to God was so direct, the moment you would lose that connection to God, you would die. But since today our connection to God is not as direct, it's possible that we can lose that connection and still live. It's an interesting point. You can read it there. But the point as it pertains to here, and by the way, we may get there to that section in a couple of years, but the point as it pertains to here is the fact that certain sins include in them the sin of karet, being cut off. And we should know what that means is that after the sin, it's much harder to become reconnected to God. Of course, one can still do tshuva and get back to there, but the point is that naturally, the damage of that sin is so bad that you would be disconnected. You'd be fully disconnected. Whereas most sins, you only become disconnected in a certain area of your life. In the area where that sin or that mitzvah that you missed out, you're disconnected in that specific area of your life. This is like, so that side. So after the act of transgression, his body and energizing animal soul enmeshed in his body return and rise from the sitra achron, from the klipa contamination, and they come close again to the holiness of the divine soul, which is enmeshed in them, which believes in the one God. So this is what he's saying here, is that after the sin is our godly soul, and even our animal soul can come back connected to God. That's his point. Just 1 second.
I'm reading the note below that. It's very interesting.
Yeah, so I want to read the note. That's what I was looking at. The note, the Tanya has notes as Alter Rebbe went over it. So let's read the note over here. Says the footnotes, the point of a Torah penalty is not to punish, but to cleanse the soul from the blemish caused by the sin. Therefore, the penalty in each case. That's why, by the way, a lot of times I call God's punishments not punishments. You might call them consequences, right? So if you roll in the mud, you have to wash your hands. If you get lice, you got to use very, very harsh soap. It might hurt. Let's continue. Will corresponds to various different ways, a soul and its root.
No. Therefore, the penalty in each case will correspond to various
Yeah, I'm
different
looking. Oh,
ways.
okay, there. Yes, I was trying to figure out where he was going off of. Okay, therefore, the penalty in each case will correspond to various different ways. A soul on its root above might become blemished. This is the reason for the various forms of cleansing and punishment in purgatory in the next world, or suffering in this world. Each sin and transgression having its particular punishment as prescribed by the Torah, to cleanse and remove the spiritual stain of blemish that it caused. So too, transgressions punishable by death or kares. Even though their punishment appears to be the same, they are not equal in terms of blemish they inflict on the soul. Want to point something out here. So he's obviously saying there's a consequence to what we do, and therefore the different types of punishments in the world to come or in this world are to cleanse us for certain sins. I want to point out, of course, that doesn't mean that when a person experiences negativity in their life, they necessarily know for a fact that it is a punishment for a sin or a sin that they did in this lifetime. There's various options or reasons why someone would be suffering, and therefore it is not to us to divine and say as a matter of fact that this happened because of that. There are unfortunately rabbis out there who have a very negative way of leading their congregation. They like to scare them, and they point to terrible things that happen to people and people that die, and they like to point to sins that they possibly did. And I say, well, I don't know. We have no idea. We really don't know. There's no way we can know because we're not God. If you truly study all the text, yes, the punishments and pain in this world can come because of our sins that we have done. But it also might be for sins that we have done in a previous lifetime. And it also might be for other reasons. All the reasons you can find in our sources. So how can you know when you see someone suffering that it's because of a specific sin that you think they did in this lifetime? Nobody can know. So, and even if it's for a sin they did in a previous lifetime, it's not how are we going to understand the justice of that. So what do they do now? It's a complicated pie, so to speak, to cut up. So it disturbs me greatly when I see these rabbis, these know-it-alls, coming on as if they know exactly what's happening to someone and for what reason. So even though this is a true thing, and there is punishment, but I call it cleansing and I call it consequences. But for us to know exactly why someone has experienced what they're experiencing, we don't know. What we do know is that whenever we do experience pain, or when we see other people suffering in the world, we have to find ways to ease other people's pain and to better ourselves. We can learn lessons from things, even if we don't know exactly why they happened, right? It's two different things. It even goes back to, if we want to say, we go back to the story of Joseph and his brothers, Joseph told his brothers, I'm not upset at you because I was going to be sent down to Egypt anyways. God had a plan for me to become the viceroy of Egypt. But just because God had a plan for Joseph doesn't mean that his brothers didn't make a bad choice. So his brothers did make a bad choice, and they still have to look deep inside of themselves to atone for what they did. That doesn't mean that they can say that, oh, because of what they did, that's what happened to Joseph. That's my point here. My point here is that don't be so full of yourself that you know exactly why things are happening. So the brothers shouldn't say, oh, we or earlier on in life, we caused these terrible things in the world. They actually didn't. In fact, they brought something good. But then on the flip side, they shouldn't say, oh, well, because we brought something good to the world, therefore we don't have to repent for our sin. No, it's my point. Life is complicated. And the most that we know is what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. And whenever things happen in our lives, we always should use them as an opportunity to do good and to better ourselves. And that's all we can really say on this matter.
Rabbi,
Yes.
So what I'm getting is out of this is that we could look at redemption. This whole conversation. We're seeing this in today with like the Menendez brothers. I see like we have a committee, who make determinations about what is the punishment and things like that. And you look and it's like, oh yeah, going to jail. It's not really a punishment. It's an opportunity to reflect. And then you have, meetings after we're out, to see where they are in their reflection. What have you discovered for yourself? What
Well, let me just pause you there for a second. In theory, what you're saying is correct. In practice, the justice system doesn't really operate that way. The justice system is not designed to cleanse people and to help them better themselves. Unfortunately, it's slowly changing, but the American system is very punitive and doesn't seek ways to better people. They just lock them up. Some of them, thankfully, contemplate and better themselves, but many don't because it's not designed that way. It's just designed to lock people up.
Well, I think that's because they're missing the point. And
No,
what's
um, I don't think the prisoners are missing the point. I think the justice system is missing the point.
no, that's what I meant.
Oh yeah, okay,
Yeah,
okay. I
yeah.
agree.
So it's based on Judaic principles. Here it is. This is the basis of law. And what we do today is really based on all this stuff. And
Well, no,
but
I don't know. I don't know where prison came from because
yeah,
you will not find prison in Jewish law.
well, it's because they misinterpret this, you
Yeah.
know?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let's get back here. There's two comments. I don't necessarily understand either one. So if people want to expound there in the chat. I may have missed it when I said something. Sometimes I move on. All right. So let's continue here. Let's continue here. Even though the sin was a complete detachment from God, it was a temporary one, a momentary exile for the divine soul. And he says like this. Now, this is the important line today. What we said till now, really, I've explained to you in previous classes. Here is a new thought for today. Very fascinating one. And he says like this. Even though the sin was a complete detachment from God, it was but a temporary moment of exile of the divine soul. And now he adds, and even while the sin was being committed, the soul retained her loyalty to him. Again, what this means is that even when a person is sinning, obviously their divine soul didn't forget about God. The divine soul is, then where is the divine soul? So he says it's in a state of exile, as he continues. Only it was in a state of complete exile, trapped and powerless within the animal soul, etc. So again, if we've been saying till now that naturally the natural state and a hidden love and the godly soul always want to connect to God. So how do you sin? We must say that love of God and that godly soul is still within you, but you've exiled it. What is exile? Exile means when a person is placed where they don't want to be and where they cannot do what they're meant to do. So when we sin, we are in essence taking our godly soul and we're bottling it up. They talk about bottling up emotions, right? You're bottling up your godly soul. And he continues like this. So again, it was only in a state of complete exile within the animal soul. Oh, one of the Menendez brothers was Lyle. Okay, now I got it. Which caused the body to sin and dragged it down together to the depths of the grave. So far down that they were lower than the impurity of the Sitra Achra and Klipa of idolatry. May God protect us. So, with your sin, your animal soul. Oh, you're right. I'm not sharing the screen. Thank you. With your sin, with your animal soul, you drag it down to the depths of the grave. It's an interesting line. Why does he use the word the depths of the grave? Because again, to us, to Jews, Life is connection to God, and death is disconnection from God. So the language in Proverbs, to the depths of the grave, means when you cause the body to sin, you're dragging it, quote unquote, to the depths of the grave. And as he says, so far down that you're lower than, as we said in previous classes, that you're lower down than regular impurity. Why? Because only a human being can actually lower themselves lower than impurity. How so? Because regular impurity, impure forces in this world still follow the will of God. But a human being with their free will has the choice to even go against God. So what's his point here? His point here is that when you sin, imagine this. You have a godly soul within you who only wants to connect to God. And you're bottling it up and dragging it down with you to the lowest of the low that anybody can go. What's the lowest of the low? A human being sinning is the lowest of the low, because only a human being can go lower than impurity itself, than the forces of impurity. That's a terrible thing to do to your soul. And as he continues, and there is no greater exile than this, a plunge from a high roof to a deep pit. So can you imagine? A Jew goes from a mitzvah and then goes to sin. You're taking it. You know, we talk about how people have fallen, right? Great leaders, politicians, things happen, and then they're fallen, they're jailed. That's what you're doing to your godly soul. Imagine you're the height of your political career. Then the person does a sin and they're jailed and embarrassed and forever shunned by society. That's what we're doing to our godly soul every single time we sin. We're taking that godly soul and we're dragging it down to the lowest place. And it's terrible. And as he will give an example here, as was explained above in chapter 2, that the root and source of every soul in the house of Israel is from the supreme Chokhmah, which is so intimately bound with God that he and his Chokhmah are one. And to take such an entity as holy as the soul and drag it into sin, which remember, we said in chapter 2, that's what he was referring to, really, that the godly soul is really a part of God. Our godly soul is a part of God. To take that soul and to sin with it is comparable to taking the king's head, dragging it down, and dunking his face into a toilet full of excrement. And there's no greater humiliation than that, even if a person does it for just a moment. The analogy is a precise one, since the klipas and setrach are referred to as vomit and excrement, as is known. So here the Alter Rebbe is giving us a tangible way of depicting what we do when we sin. And again, the reason why he wants to tell us this is we have to realize the gravity of any sin at any moment, because we give ourselves all different types of excuses and reasons why we can sin right now. But remember, any sin, no matter what the sin is, no matter how minor that sin is, it's a moment of disconnection from God. It's a moment where you are making a choice to go against God. It's a moment where you can drag yourself lower than any of the impure forces in this world, because the impure forces follow God, and here you're going against God. And so at that moment, you're taking your piece of God inside of you, which is a part of God, and you're stuffing it in a toilet where someone just had diarrhea. That's what you're doing at that moment. And he says that the analogy is actually exact, because the Zohar says, Isaiah says that the evil forces are like vomit and excrement. And so if we were to imagine to ourselves that we are taking a piece of God and dragging it into the excrement, we would think twice before doing it. And just to give a story that brings this idea home, Rabbi Zalman Posner was a Chabad rabbi, and I believe in Nashville, Tennessee. He actually moved there under the previous Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, in the 40s. And after the previous Rabbi passed away, he kind of got a little disillusioned. And he felt that maybe he should take his life in a different direction. You know, even though he was an emissary of the Rebbe, he would get into some professions and things which was against what the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe wanted of him. But he felt, like most of us feel when we make these choices, is we're making a personal choice of what's best for us at the moment. We're making a personal choice of what we think can work for us and how we can handle our lives at that moment. And the Rebbe, our current Rebbe, sent him a very sharp letter, and he said, in essence, when you're making this choice about what you're going to do, you are not just making a personal choice. Because you are an emissary of the Rebbe, wherever you go, you take the Rebbe with you. And you are now dragging the Rebbe and his name down into wherever you're going. And so he said, think carefully, think twice before you choose to make such a choice, because it's not a personal choice. Think about it practically. As a Jew, right? If we are publicly displaying ourselves as a Jew, wherever we go, this is just on a very human level, right? Wherever we go, people associate what we're doing as a Jew. And so imagine if, as a Jew, okay, like Bernie Madoff made, that was a bad name for all Jews. You might say unfairly so, but it did. If I, as a rabbi, go certain places, I mean, that's why there's Jewish laws against marat ayin, against things that might seem not looking good, right? It's very questionable for a rabbi to walk into a McDonald's. Now, today they say because you can get a can of Coke in McDonald's, maybe you can go. But the general point here is that there's so many Jewish laws against things that even seem wrong, even if they're not wrong. So can you imagine if you're actually doing something wrong, people say, look, this is, how many times have I actually met people that have told me, oh, that guy, that religious guy, he did this, or that rabbi did that. And how it makes them change their outlook on Judaism and Jews or rabbis or Chabad or whatever it is. But there's an element of truth there. Okay, so even though we shouldn't really judge the whole movement based on the actions of one person, there's an element of truth there, which is truthfully, every single one of us is always carrying within us a godly soul, a piece of God. And when we choose to sin, at the moment that we choose to sin, we are dragging that piece of God into whatever mud and whatever we're getting involved to. And that's just a terrible thing to think about. You wouldn't even want to do it for a moment, as he describes it. Who would want to take the king's head? You tell the king, hey, Mr. King, I want to have some fun. It's okay. I'll just, stick your head in the toilet for a few minutes, and afterwards you'll be okay. How can we think of doing such a thing? That's what he's trying to bring to us home, the severity of our choices that we make. I want to end off, though, on a positive note in this chapter. There is one positive note, and the positive note is that even when we have gone to terrible places, always remember the other thing that he said in this chapter, and that is that, and this was something the Rabbi used to quote a lot from the Tanya, that even while a sin was being committed, the divine soul retained her loyalty to him. Even while we sin, our divine soul retains loyalty to him, and that means that we should never give up on ourselves and we should never give up on other people. Is that even when we sin, we might be tempted to say we're a lost cause, remember that we always have that godly soul. We can never get rid of the godly soul. We might be dragging that godly soul through the mud and through the toilet, but no matter how low you go, always remember that there's a godly soul within you that's always connected to God, and therefore you always have the opportunity to connect to God. The most common phrase that people who feel lost say, I've gone too far. I'm too far gone, right? I'm too far gone. I'm sure you've heard that. And what the Adler Rabbi is telling us here is that you should know it's never too far gone. You're never too far gone. You always have an opportunity to return because you have that godly soul within you that will always allow you to come back. Okay. Okay, I think we've got to everything. Any questions or comments on this chapter before we go to the next chapter? Nope, we're all good. Okay. So we're ready to move on to chapter 25, which is exciting because chapter 25 is the end of this section of the Tanya. And after that, we're going to turn to some very interesting things. So chapter 25 is ending a discussion that we started in chapter 18. So let me catch you up. Let me catch you up on what happened in these chapters. In chapter 18 and 19, we discussed about the hidden love, how there is a natural desire in the Jewish person to connect to God and not to disconnect from God. Then in chapters 20, 21, and 22, we discussed the concept of the unity of God saying that God is one. And when we said that God is one, we said it doesn't just mean that God is one with himself, but it means that everything is part and parcel of God. And even though we said in chapter 22 that everything is part of God, some things in this world can operate as if they are separate from God. God gives them that ability to. They are still connected to God, but their connection to God is more distant. We gave examples, throwing something over your shoulder. You cannot say they're disconnected, because nothing, if something's disconnected from God, it wouldn't exist. But nevertheless, it is, so to speak, denying its own existence. It's denying its own reality. It's denying the fact that it is connected to God. And therefore, we discussed that commandments reveal our connection to the one God, and sins disconnect us from God. Okay, that was all chapter 20 to 22. Sorry, and that was 23 and 24. Sorry, 23 and 24. 23 was about how mitzvahs connect us with God, and 24 was about how sins disconnect us from God. Now we are going to get to chapter 25, which is his final, the crescendo, which is that we can finally explain how doing a mitzvah is not only close, but very close. What drives a person is their emotions. That's really been the main theme of the Tanya. Today we live in a world where emotions are a big topic. And the Tanya, honestly, when you think about the book, really spends its whole time talking about emotions. That's the basic discussion of the Tanya. Even when we're talking about intellect, we talk about intellect in as much because we want the intellect to elicit emotions. Tanya recognizes that emotions are a basic driver of how we act. There are many people out there who love to bottle up emotions, close down emotions. But the Tanya works from the point of view that we should focus on what we think about, and that will awaken our emotions. And generally, in the world, they might call that reframing, all different ways of thinking about things, and that can affect how our emotional state. But the Tanya has over here one, let's call it nuclear option. It has a trick up its sleeve. Let's put it that way. And the trick up the Tanya's sleeve is the fact that although generally most emotions require thought to create that emotion, there is one type of emotion that a human being can have that does not require creation, but requires awakening. Again, there's one type of, let's call it holy emotion. Unholy emotions can come pretty easily. There's one type of holy emotion that does not require creation, but requires awakening. And that is the natural love of the godly soul towards God. So let me just rephrase that again. It's a powerful point of the Tanya. This is such a powerful point of Tanya. Again, when you put it in light of psychology, you get today. Again, psychology today is all about accepting your feelings, understanding your feelings. What are your feelings? Because we understand that our feelings and emotions drive the way we live. The Tanya has been, the beginning of the Tanya is all about that's true, and therefore we need to create emotions and feelings towards God. And here the Tanya is saying, guess what? There's some emotions towards God that don't require creation. They only require revelation. That's a wonderful and amazing thing. And that's how the Tanya says we can say that it is very close and very near to connect to God. If I had to create the emotions towards God, if the only way to connect to God was to create emotions, then I would say, I could do it, but it's not easy. We know how hard it is to get our minds to think anything. We know how hard it is to create emotions, to create emotional connection. But the Tanya says, no, it's very close. How can I say emphatically? How can the Torah say it emphatically? It's very close and very near to you to connect to God, because you don't even have to create the emotion. You just have to reveal it. That has been the entire discussion of what we've been leading to over the last couple chapters. So let us, with that, dive into the Tanya over here. let's take a look here. Page 284. 284. Okay. Says like this. From chapter 18 up until this point, we have been in the process of explaining why worship is very much within reach. In this chapter, we will conclude the discussion. And this discussion in chapter 18 to 24 will enable us to explain the verse. Rather, the thing is very much within reach for you, etc. Deuteronomy. Remember, so Deuteronomy said in the verse, don't say that it's in the sky. We have to find somebody who can get ladders to get to the sky. Don't say it's across the sea, that we have to get boats to cross the sea. Rather, it is very near to you. So what does he mean? Worship is very much within reach, since at all times and at any moment, you have the power and ability to rid yourself of the delusional spirit and unconsciousness inside of you. We spoke about the delusional spirit at length. By recalling and awakening your love of one God, which without any doubt, he says, without any doubt, is definitely dormant in your heart. The methods of chapter 1 and 17, on the other hand, which requires you to think about the greatness of God of the Blessed Infinite One, can't be conjured up at every moment, since it takes some work to get there. And you have to be in the right frame of mind. And this is the meaning of the words, rather the thing is very much within your reach for you, in your mouth and in your heart, so that you can do it. It is very much within reach for you to get excited about God in your heart, since all you have to do is crack through the falsehood of delusional spirit and allow the love which is already in your heart to awaken. So we have to crack through the delusional spirit. And included in this love is also reverence, because as we said earlier, you need reverence included in love. Love of God can only inspire you acts of love, i.e. the positive commandments, but if worship of God is very much within reach, then it should also be straightforward to awaken reverence of God, to inspire you to refrain from all prohibitions. The Tanya reminds us here of the solution to this problem in chapter 19, that love contains reverence. What does reverence mean? Namely, that you love God so much that you don't want to be separated anyway from his non-dual oneness. Again, I want to point out that Tanya is so beautiful. Notice how he explains reverence, or what people call fear or awe or love, right? People generally understand fear means I'm afraid God's going to smash me. It's going to destroy my life. I'm afraid God's going to punish me. No, that's not fear of God, as we explained many times. That's fear of self. You're just afraid of getting punished. It has nothing to do with God. Fear of punishment has nothing to do with God. Fear of punishment is you're just scared for yourself. You're scared for what's good in your life. It's not a relationship with God. That's not a love of God. No, love of God means, sorry, that's not a fear of God. What is fear of God? Fear of God means you fear God, not you fear what's going to happen to you. Fear of God means that you are afraid to be separated from God. Say that again. Fear of God means, or as uses the word reverence here, is you are afraid to be separated from God. That all fits with what we've been describing till now. Is that I have this natural soul that only wants connection with God. When I recognize that any sin disconnects me from God, I will be afraid to do that sin. And again, I'm not afraid to do that sin because of what God is going to do to me. No, that's the after effects, as we discussed. I'm afraid of the sin itself. I'm afraid of sin, not afraid of punishment. I'm afraid of sin. Why am I afraid of sin? Because I'm afraid of the sin itself, because I know that every sin, when I break through my folly spirit, because I know that every sin at that moment disconnects me from God, lowers me to the lowest place, drags my godly soul through the excrement. At that moment, I am disconnected from God, at least on a very conscious level. Reverence is included in love, since you dread losing the intimate connection with God that you already have. Even if it means actually giving up your life without any compelling reason or grasp of logic, but simply because the divine soul found naturally within you. So again, you are so afraid of disconnecting from God that you will not sin, even if your life is going to be taken when it comes to idolatry, right? And he says, the Tanya now revisits the advice offered at the end of the previous chapter on how to arouse your dormant love to resist the delusional spirit. And as a dormant love can inspire you to give up your life for God, all the more so can it inspire you to break free from your desires, something which is clearly easier than torture of martyr's death, which your soul will be willing to undergo if need be. So again, the godly soul that's always within us has the ability to always be awakened at any moment and remind us that we truly love God and we want to connect with him. That means we want to do mitzvah. And I don't want to do anything wrong, which will disconnect me from him. He's going to explain this power of our natural love to God and our natural reverence of God a little bit more in a moment. But before we do, I want to just read the Chassidic thought at the bottom, which just brings home what we've been saying. My dormant love is very much within reach and accessible to me at all times and at every moment, because all I have to do is awaken from the unconsciousness of my delusional spirit. As soon as I realize the lies my mind has been telling me, I can awaken and feel the natural affinity that my soul has for God, my intuitive awareness of his presence everywhere. Such a powerful line. As soon as I realize the lies my mind has been telling me, it's the lies that our mind has been telling us. I want to give an example to this idea from physical life. Nobody in their right mind, okay, let's take healthy people. Nobody in their right mind is taking any poison, right? But yet, every single day, many of us right? Why doesn't anybody take poison? Because we want to live, we don't want to die. But nevertheless, every single day, many of us make decisions that affect our health. Second. Every single day, we make choices that affect our health. Maybe we are avoiding exercise. Maybe we're smokers. Maybe we drink a lot. Not l'chaim, but drink a lot. Maybe we eat lots of sugar. Maybe we're putting on lots of weight. Whatever it is, many of us make decisions that we know will lead to our death, but we choose them anyways. So what are the reasons that we make those choices? One reason could be is that it's a one-off. I do this once, it's not a big deal. Another reason, though, is not only if I do it once, it's not a big deal, but I'll eat a cookie today and I'll go on a diet tomorrow, right? Everybody's going on a diet tomorrow. So everybody understands.
Can I give you my answer?
Yeah, what?
Because there's some sort of hidden commitment that would take over for our commitment to do that. Another commitment.
There's a hidden commitment.
Yes, like I want that satisfaction right now of that cookie.
No, we get that, but we also know, what if the poison tastes really good, right? You're not going to take the poison. So what's the difference?
It's the commitment.
You know the poison is going to kill you right away.
Yeah.
We're delusional when it comes to things that have take longer to affect us. But what I want to add here is that even when we make a bad choice in our health, if God gets in the picture, we might be able to overcome that, and that actually proves the godly soul. So, for example, even if you would normally eat a chocolate chip cookie, you're not going to eat one on Yom Kippur. As it pertains to religious Jews, I'll give this, it's a bad joke, but when I say bad, I mean it puts us in a bad light. But the story goes, there was a guy in his office, and there was a office refrigerator, and he used to bring his milk to the office for his coffee. And every day he would come back, and part of his milk was missing. So he realized coworkers were taking milk when he wasn't looking. So the next day he wrote on it, "This is Shmuley's milk. Nobody should take it." Well, people kept taking it. All right, so you got more brazen. He just wrote on it. This is the next day he wrote, "This is Shmuley's milk. The Torah says, do not steal, do not take my milk." But yet his milk was still missing. So finally he gave up. The next day he brought in a bottle of milk. He tore off the old label. He put like a Publix non-kosher milk label on it, and nobody took his milk again. What's the point of the joke? The point of the joke here is, of course, we know not stealing is a problem too. So why would the people steal? They wouldn't drink non-kosher milk. They're just like the rest of us. They have in their mind, they have the animal soul, which gives us a delusional spirit. They had a delusional spirit. So I'll steal, I'll give them, I always help my coworker anyways. I always, or who says a little bit of milk is stealing? It's under the small amount, it's considered stealing. Or I'll bring another bottle of milk another day. We have delusions, but when the delusions disappear, we are able to overcome. But one of the most popular delusions is it's temporary. It's temporary, right? So when it comes to, let's say, stealing or like stealing milk, this is a common one. Even people don't generally steal. People will steal small things saying, well, I'll bring it back. There's actually many stories told Jewish about people who took things, and then when it came found out, they couldn't give it back because it was too much of a hullabaloo. But it's very interesting that when it comes to stealing, small things, we can give ourselves a delusional spirit that, okay, so I stole it, but I'm going to give it back. I'll bring it back. That reminds me, I actually owe somebody here something. I didn't steal it, I borrowed it, but I owe somebody something here. So we have to, we're gonna get back to it. The same thing, by the way, is with our spiritual sins. With our spiritual sins, a lot of times we might say, I'm gonna sin, but I'll get back to it. How many people stopped going to shul? Okay, some people stop doing things. Some people stop doing things from a theological perspective, but some people just one time they stop it because they were going on a cruise, or they're going on a trip, a vacation. They miss this, they miss that. They're going to a sports game, and then they get in the habit. They stop doing it. That's how the delusional spirit works. It tries to first get us on a very minor infraction and tells us it's just a one-off. It's just a small thing. It's just a one-time. It's just a small infraction. You can do it. It's temporary. That's a common refrain. It's just a temporary thing. And we have to know that when we sin, there's no such thing as temporary. Every sin is a complete disconnection from God. And even if you say, well, what do you mean? I could do teshuvah afterwards. You're right. You could do teshuvah afterwards. But at that moment, you're completely cut off. That's why we said that a Jew will die for the sake of God, even if afterwards they'll live a Jew the rest of their life. Because we understand that at the moment that you sin, you are completely disconnected. And that's not something that people want. Let's give an example, because we actually naturally do this. Sometimes we want things, going back to actually what Adam was saying earlier, same thing. Sometimes we want things so much that we actually focus on the temporary. We say, I need to have this now. It doesn't make a difference anything about later. I need to have it now. I want it now. I'm going to do it now. Worry about the consequences later. Well, that actually works in the reverse. The same thing is with the sin. Because when I do a sin, all that really matters is now. To the godly soul, it's fully disconnected. It doesn't want any part of being disconnected from God at any single moment. In fact, you don't want it. You just don't realize it. Because you've made a differentiation between this sin and that sin. Let's take a look over here. Let's take a look in here. Basically, he's going to make the point like this. He's going to make the point that you would not temporarily serve idols. So he says the same way you wouldn't temporarily serve idols, you shouldn't temporarily do any sin. Let's take a look. He says, surely then it is more within reach for you to overcome your evil inclination, which involves a relatively small sacrifice of pleasure than to give up your life. To bow down to an idol or to do something that would completely disconnect you from God is unthinkable. But once you bring to mind the message of chapters 24, that every transgression is the utter rejection of God, every transgression, you can begin to see all the prohibitions in the same light. In a non-dual universe, there are only two possible states of being. Either you are aligned to the reality that there's no place devoid of him, or you have splintered from that reality into a delusional bubble of separateness. There is no intermediate state. To commit any transgression is to drag your being into a state of separateness and unconsciousness. So that's, again, a very important point. There's no middle ground. You are either connected or disconnected. This awareness will enable you to both turn away from evil and to avoid transgressing any prohibition, even a minor rabbinic prohibition, so as not to transgress God's will, which, as we learned in the previous chapter, is expressed equally in all prohibitions, biblical and rabbinic. Since at the moment of transgression, you are separated from God's non-dual oneness as if you had literally worshipped idols, as we discussed at length in the previous chapter. He explained the previous chapter. He says, the moment of sin, whether you're serving idols or whether you are not not celebrating Hanukkah, which Hanukkah is a rabbinic mitzvah, you are separating from God. There's no difference. Just because one's biblical, one's rabbinic, one's idolatry, because there's only two states of being, connection or disconnection from God. One of the techniques of the delusional spirit, and by the way, we explained how that applies even in our day-to-day life. Even when I'm at work, I have the opportunity to work in a godly way or a non-godly way. One of the techniques of the delusional spirit is to convince you that a transgression is tolerable now, since you will only be separated from God momentarily. But if that were the case, you would worship idols too, since even in the case of idolatry, you can repent afterwards. The emotional revulsion for idolatry as a complete renunciation of faith should be shared with all transgressions, which at the moment of the deed represent an utter rejection of God. You wouldn't worship idols on the premise that you could repent afterwards, so you shouldn't carry out any other transgression on the basis that it only separates you from God temporarily. He brought an interesting point here, which many people don't realize. Assuming there's no witnesses, right? In Jewish law, idolatry is punishable by death. But if there are no witnesses witnessing you serving the idols, you will not get punishable by death. So it's conceivable that a Jew in private gets a gun to their head and is told, serve idols, or else we'll put you to death, and the Jew will be put to death. You could say, why? Let him serve the idols, and afterwards do teshuvah. We know that everybody can do teshuvah. There's never a moment where teshuvah is not acceptable. As long as you're alive, God says you should do teshuvah. Why not serve those idols and then do teshuvah? In fact, there's the famous story of Hanukkah. Chana and her 7 sons. Her 7 sons, there were no witnesses available. The king says, just bow down to the idol once. In the city of Modi'in, Matasyahu put to death another Jew who was bowing down to an idol in public. Let him bow down to the idol, and then let him do teshuvah, or you yourself. But we understand that when certain sins come to the fore, it's a moment of faith. It's a moment of faith. Our faith is displayed. Our true belief is displayed. There are so many stories throughout history of Jews who were not very religious, but at the moment of test of faith, they revealed their Jewish identity. They revealed who they were. They showed their Jewish colors. Because a Jew knows deep down, so hopefully it's not so deep down, that there's no such thing as I disconnect myself completely. That's why the same thing in a marriage. Why can't the husband and the wife say, well, I'll just, I'll have a one-night thing, then I'll come back. Complete betrayal. What do you mean, he says? It's one night? It's complete betrayal. At that moment, it's complete betrayal. Yeah, there is reconciliation afterwards. It happens, couples. But at that moment, it was complete betrayal. And the truth is, says the Tanya, that every sin is a complete betrayal of God. Every sin is a complete betrayal of God. It's the delusional spirit that tells us it's not so. But the reality is that every sin is a complete rejection and denial of God in that moment, as he explained, because there's only 2 states of being, connection or disconnection from God. And even though you could do teshuvah afterwards, doesn't change the moment And that's why he says, and he brings the proof that even idolatry one can do teshuvah for. But yet we still see Jews don't sin. So the same way you would not bow down to an idol and then repent, the same way you should not do anything else that you know would disconnect you from God and then repent. Now, I know I'm just to end off on a practical note, that we'll have a more practical example next week, where we're going to talk about how the evil inclination is so fascinating that you give it a hand and it takes you for a ride. The slippery slope that the animal soul takes us on is another important topic to discuss. But putting that aside, we need to understand that this was a powerful moment of the Tanya to tell you that ask yourself, would I bow down to an idol? Or think of any other test of faith. Would I withstand that, even if it was a momentary moment? If your answer is that you would, then bring that into your current challenge. I want to say, just to make that practical as well, is that a lot of us don't relate to giving up our lives for God. And that's why I like to bring in other things that are non-negotiable in your life. There are other Jewish elements of your life that are non-negotiable. Maybe it's fasting, or I don't know, there are elements of your life that are non-negotiable, whatever it is. So for some people, there are different elements of their life that are non-negotiable. And you have to tell yourself that if that's me, why don't I apply that to other parts of my life? That's how we are meant to awaken our godly soul within us. Is that if that's me over there, then that should be me everywhere. And the only reason it's not is because of the delusional spirit of the animal soul. We're going to stop there. And we'll have to continue next week with the 26th of Shvat. An interesting continuation to this topic.